G'day everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. Before we start, I'd like to tell you a story, and it's about my father-in-law. Now, he recently retired, and he was part of the GEPF for 40 years. Just the amount of conversations and questions that we had made me realize how important this was to him and how important good GEPF financial advice is. And not anyone can actually give this advice because you need to understand, and very importantly, you need to appreciate how the GEPF works. And that's the only way that you can really partner with your customer. So the aim of the Masterclass series is to make you this expert, and we'll give you a CPD certificate to prove that you are the expert. But the real value will be in how you're going to engage with the content. And ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce session 1, where we've got Navita that will unpack the GEPF benefits. We've got Emlyn that will help us how to make it practical by demonstrating the GEPF calculator and help us interpret the report. And my final tip for you before we start is a quote that I try and live by. If you are there, be there. I hope you enjoy the session.
Good morning. I am Navita Maharaj, a legal advisor advanced in the PF division. I'll be taking you through the Government Employee Pension Fund benefits this morning. Good morning once again. This morning we're going to be discussing the Government Employees Pension Fund in a masterclass, and more specifically, unpacking Government Employee Pension Fund benefits. Our agenda this morning is going to take us through death, funeral, disability, and illness. We're beginning with the death benefit. And our payouts in respect of death benefits generally is going to be based on a fixed formula as well as a length of service. Now, if we had to unpack the death benefit, we would then have to take that a step further into death before retirement as well as death after retirement. If we take that journey, death before retirement, one would then have to look at a lesson of 10 years of service, and that would be your benchmark. Before 10 years of service, meaning that there's less than 10 years worth of service, you have a lump sum that gets paid to a nominated beneficiary. There's usually no spouse's pension or a child pension, but there are certain circumstances when that is possible. So if you have passed away and there's less than 10 years of service, however, your future service up to the age of 60 would have given you more than 10 years worth of service, then it is a possibility that you would still have a spouse pension as well as a child pension. If, however, you have more than 10 years worth of service, then you would be entitled to a lump sum, again based on an actuarial formula. Your spousal pension would be very valid, as well as a child's pension. Now, if you then had to logically ask, what then is a spousal pension and what is a child's pension? Your spousal pension is an entitlement to an eligible spouse, an eligible spouse being somebody you are lawfully married to, a spouse in terms of a customary union, a spouse that is recognized in terms of the tenets of religion. Now, in terms of customary unions, as well as that in terms of a tenet of religion, would include your Muslim and Hindu marriages, and your customary marriages that is recognized in terms of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, which means that all the requirements for a customary marriage would then have to be satisfied, which would include the payment of lobola and anything else that goes along with that. Your logical question that follows on from that is then what is a child's pension? We will unpack that a little further in a few slides, but for now, child's pension is something to a recognized child, and that would be a biological child as well as an adopted child. So it does not include a child that you take care of or is a child of your family that lives with you. So therefore, we need to be very aware of those requirements. As I said in the slide that was before, the spousal pension, you need to be a qualifying spouse or an eligible life partner. Now, very clearly, a life partner would be somebody that you're living with, and so it would what we may call a common law spouse, but that is actually something that needs to be proved. So it would be a qualifying spouse or an eligible life partner who's entitled to a percentage of an annuity paid. When we talk of annuities, that speaks directly to post-retirement, which then means that if you are retired and then you pass away, so that would be something that speaks directly to post-retirement, then your partner would be eligible to approximately 50% of the annuity you would have been paid. Now, the same applies if a member does while in service and had a potential service period of at least 10 years, which basically means that if you passed away with more than 10 years of service, your spouse will get a pension. And as I mentioned before, if you have less than 10 years worth of service, but your unexpired years of service until normal retirement is in excess of 10 years, then you will be entitled to a spousal pension as well. Moving on. The child's pension, taking that a bit further, what used to happen in a previous status quo was that before 1 June 2018, there was an orphan's pension, which meant that it was exactly that, a child's pension. You'd have to have been an orphan to qualify. That changed in June 2018 to indicate that there would now be a child's pension. The requirements for such a child's pension was only the member or the pensioner needs to be deceased. So in the new circumstances, both parents need not be deceased, and a child needs to be a biological child as well as an adopted child. So an eligible child, if we had to take that a step further, is one who qualifies for a child's pension, would be a biological or an adopted child up to the age of 22 years, regardless of whether that child's a student or not. So there's a very different set of rules when it comes to GEPF and defining a child. So within the GEPF, your child is defined as somebody who's 22 years or younger. In normal circumstances, the age of majority in South Africa is 18 years or younger. So it's very different with the government employee pension fund. And if your child is disabled and fully dependent on the deceased member, then that particular child will qualify for a child's pension until he or she passes away. So you have then a child pensioner for life when it comes to a child who is fully dependent on you and disabled. Defining disability would depend on how the Income Tax Act would then define that disability. So how is a child's share of a benefit calculated? It is calculated as a percentage of what the member would have been entitled to on the date of death. There are permutations which include whether there is a spouse or not, how many children there are, and that would all determine how a child's share is then calculated for a child pension. In order to qualify as a child pensioner, then you would be then entitled to that up to the age of 22 years old. How payments are made? Usually to the bank account of the guardian of the child. However, if the child is between the age of 18 and 22 years old, which means adults in terms of South African law, then the money would be paid directly into that child's bank account as soon as they turn 18. Late claims, what exactly does that mean? Late claims is when the benefits due to all the children are calculated, and thereafter there is another child that comes into the calculation, which means a child has then been proved to be either a biological or adopted child of the deceased. Thereafter, once that claim is received after the initial calculation, then it is a recalculation that is done so that the benefits due to all the child pensioners will then be recalculated based on the amount of children that are claiming. Now, that is very common when it comes to our South African situation, mainly because we have blended families. We have illegitimate children who are still biological children that would have to be considered. Now, if these minor children are then not all accounted for in terms of the initial calculation, and if there is a claim from such a child later on, then there would be the recalculation. The claim of the late claimer child would be as of the date of the claim, and the recalculation of the child pensioners benefit would then also be from the date of the late claimer. Moving on to death after retirement, and I think this is a very important section because there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding in the market as to how this operates, and often gets confused with the annuity that is paid out to a client if you've passed away after retirement. Now, before we move on, understand that when you retire, so this is death after retirement, when you retire and if you've got more than 10 years worth of service, you're entitled to an annuity as well as a lump sum on retirement. And if you should pass away within 5 years after retirement, your family or your nominated beneficiaries will be entitled to the balance of your annuity payments if you've died within 5 years. So put in other words, you have a guaranteed period of your annuity for 5 years. And if you should die within that 5 years, then the guaranteed period kicks in, which means the balance of your annuity would be paid as a lump sum to your nominated beneficiaries. We need to be very aware that if you've died and if you have a spouse, then that spouse will continue to receive an annuity, albeit at a default rate of 50% of what you received for the rest of her life. So this is important to remember, that if you've died within 5 years. So how exactly does that work? If you look at pre-retirement and post-retirement, you got cover on both, except in the post-retirement period, you will receive a lump sum that would be depreciating through 5 years. So in year one, your gap in terms of what you receive or what your beneficiaries would receive lessens. The same happens with year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and if you die after year 5, there will not be a lump sum. However, remember, if there's a qualifying spouse or if you have a child pensioner, they will continue to receive their pensions, for the spouse for a lifetime, for the children up until the age of 22, and if it is a disabled child that's fully dependent on you, then for the rest of their lives. So let's put this application into practice. Let's introduce you to my alter ego. Nevi Maharaj, born on the 16th of April, began service with the GEPF in 1994. She's purchased no additional years of service. Her final salary on exit or on death was 765,000 Rand, which translates to a monthly salary of 63,750 Rand. Employed in the KZN legislature, as a legal advisor. How does that impact? Now remember, it's 63,750 Rand per month as date of death. And my death benefit, if I had to retire, I would have got 45,568 Rand. However, on death, my family would get a lump sum, and their spouse, my husband, would only get 22,784 Rand. Now, that's a huge discrepancy from bringing home a gross salary of 63,000 Rand to a retirement potential salary of 45,500 odd Rand. Then on death, my spouse only receiving a salary of 22,784 Rand. GEPF then speaks directly to proper financial planning. It speaks directly to you preparing that what happens. Yes, there's going to be a lump sum, but a lump sum, is that going to be enough to generate enough income to bridge these gaps? Be it normal retirement at 45,000 and then you have 20,000 Rand less in your pocket. Or take that a step further, and I've died while I'm in employment or after retirement, and my spouse only gets 50% of what I would have gotten at. The conversation with a financial planner then becomes vital, and you would see that in rands and cents as the years pass and 5 years after retirement, I then find myself that if I die in the 5th year after retirement, my family or my nominated beneficiaries would only be getting a lump sum of 546,456 Rand. Now that, to bridge a gap of almost 40,000 Rand, would be difficult to say the least. Therefore, proper financial planning becomes a vital conversation with any GEPF employee. Moving swiftly along to that funeral benefit. How exactly does that work? There's definitely a gap. Here's yourself and your spouse and your children, which are the only eligible people to a funeral benefit to a government employee. Now, it includes all your spouses and all your children, if they're your biological children and adopted children. You are entitled as a member or to 15,000 Rand as a funeral benefit, and so is each of your spouses, and each of your children are then entitled to 6,000 Rand worth of funeral benefits. Now, we had to ask ourselves quite logically. We live, one, in COVID times. Two, many communities hold funerals in high regard. It's a mark of respect. It's the manner in which you say goodbye to a loved one. Many of us may prefer a simple funeral. In many communities, it is not up to the deceased as to the kind of funeral he has. It is the status that you hold in a community. It is what your family would love to do to give you a beautiful send-off. 15,000 Rand actually is inadequate to have even a simple funeral. I had the misfortune of having to lose a family member during the Delta COVID wave. The funeral in that respect cost almost 50,000 Rand, taking into account COVID protocols and everything else that went with it. So again, a conversation around who is going to pay for the shortfall in the funeral benefit would be a vital financial planning concern for anybody out there. Your spouses as well. There is not just funeral costs, there are ancillary costs that we have to consider. It is about family that comes around. It is about rituals that go along with a funeral. It is about custom that we have to avail ourselves to when it comes to our mourning periods. In respect of your children, all eligible children would qualify, again, speaking directly to adopted children as well as biological children. You may also claim for a stillbirth. However, the fund will not pay for a funeral benefit when it comes to an abortion. And in order to claim for a stillbirth, you have to have gone through at least 26 weeks of pregnancy. In dealing with your funeral benefits, they are taxable and they would be taxed as income in your hands once paid out to you. Who may claim for such a funeral benefit? Now, this is ranked in the order that the GEPF would consider the claim. The member may claim, and that would be in respect of a spouse or their children. A pensioner may claim again in respect of spouses or children. The spouse of the member or the pensioner may claim. A major child of a member or the pensioner may claim, and a guardian of a minor child of the member or the pensioner. A minor child is a child who cannot administer their own affairs, and also the guardian of that particular child may claim on the child's behalf. The parent or parent-in-law of a member or pensioner, if there's no other people, and I'm saying this in the order that the GEPF ranks it, a brother or sister or brother-in-law or sister-in-law, or the executor of a deceased estate. That comes lastly when there's no other people. And the reason that it is ranked in that order is that your funerals usually take place within a few days of a person dying, while an executor then takes a few weeks before an executor is appointed. So it's usually family and family members that would be in a position to claim for the funeral benefit. Please be very aware that the GEPF does not make any payments to a funeral undertaker, and that's in their member guide. Moving swiftly along to a disability benefit. What exactly is that? I think the most important thing about disability benefits and the GEPF is that you only enjoy a disability benefit while you are employed by the GEPF. There's still a gap in cover. I do not believe that there's adequate cover. There is an actuarial formula used to determine what your disability benefit is while you are still employed by the government. The moment you elect to retire, there is no disability benefit. Now, if we looked at that practically, we require disability more often than not in our later years when we're more likely to then become disabled. Frail care is a form of disability. The ability and mobility as we get older is a form of disability. So it is very important when we give financial planning advice that the gap in cover, one, is highlighted, pre-retirement, and secondly, the non-existence of the cover post-retirement becomes vital to the conversation. Then one needs to consider all of life disability, not really all of life disability, but all of life impairment, which is something that Old Mutual has in its armory. In order to then bridge that gap pre-retirement to post-retirement, ensuring that if a client is requiring that sort of risk cover, that conversation is had, and also ensuring that your financial planning advice has been sound, effective, and complete. Again, we have to deal with illness, and I think here is the greatest eye-opener of any conversation with a GEPF employee. Illness is something that is non-existent pre-retirement or post-retirement. It is often argued that you have the benefit of having medical aid, either in terms of the GEMS program or a private medical aid that would cover illness. Given, granted, and I must agree that yes, medical aid is an advantage. However, what does medical aid cover? Your medical aid covers direct costs. Let's just take that example of cancer. Cancer is something all of us have either encountered or been affected by. Now, your direct costs will take care of your surgery, your chemotherapy treatment, your radiation treatment, and potentially most of your medication. If you have gap cover, that will then take care of the gap between what your doctor's charging you and what your medical aid is willing to pay. So medical aid to medical aid limits is what your medical aid is actually going to take care of. Then let's deal with the indirect costs of one being either affected by cancer or directly encountering the disease. That illness has way too many indirect costs. My best friend is simply just recovering from a bout of colon cancer. She's a young mom who has 2 little girls. So apart from having a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old who were dependent on her, she had to deal with the side effects of chemotherapy, which means she herself needed assistance. She then required a full-time nanny to take care of her young children, as well as her home and her husband. She needed to have a driver to take her to and from treatments. It needed to cover her day-to-day living expenses if you're unable to work, and if your employer doesn't then give you long extended sick leave, which means you will be on unpaid leave. So the alternative medications or therapy costs, remember, when you have chemotherapy, you tend to have low iron counts, which means that you would need supplements in terms of even natural supplements that would boost your red blood counts. So chemotherapy treatment and radiation treatment has lots and lots of side effects, which is usually countered by homeopathic medication, which is used in conjunction with normal medication. So all of that is not covered by your medical aid, and it is usually an illness benefit that pays out lump sums to you when the illness occurs, so that you can take care of exactly that, all the indirect costs. There's nothing in the GEPF that allows their members to an illness benefit that pays out lump sums. So the medical aid benefit needs to then speak directly or work hand in hand with your illness benefit. So consider the following. Do you have protection when it comes to your spouse? So who will replace that income that you brought in, especially if you're a breadwinner in a family? Then consider, is your spouse then going to be able to manage with just a quarter of the income that you would have brought in? Then consider, when it comes to your family funeral cover, who's responsible for the cost of a funeral when it comes to the extended family? I am part of what we would call a sandwich generation. So I take care of my parents and I also take care of my children. So if my parents are not covered by my funeral policy, then I need to make sure that they are covered in another policy, because I am responsible for that. Also, there is responsibilities when it comes to somebody who you feel responsible for in your family. And if that extended family is not covered by funeral cover, then it poses a financial strain on your budget. Then with severe illness, we need to consider very, very importantly, what will a severe illness like cancer have on your life and your family? And the impact does have ripple effects. Disability post-retirement is non-existent. Have you then considered all of life impairment when it comes to enhancing that pre-retirement disability that there is in the GEPF? As a summary and at a high level, those are the benefits that we've covered this morning. And we'll be taking this forward in the next segment with the issue of divorce and how that is handled in the GEPF. Thank you. Welcome back to the final segment. But now we're going to be just going through briefly the Government Employee Pension Fund and divorce. So it's not a long discussion. It's actually going to take us just a few minutes, and we're simply going to go through what the current status quo is when it comes to divorces and the GEPF. So the pre-2019 position where members who were divorced were then subject to a debt model in execution of their divorce orders. What did that exactly mean? It meant that if you got divorced while you were a member of the Government Employee Pension Fund, your ex-spouse would have gotten paid out in terms of your divorce order. However, the amount that was paid out from your pension fund is then considered a debt in the pension fund. There was, pardon me. So it was considered a debt in the pension fund, and there was a interest rate that would have been attached to that debt. That interest would have accrued until your retirement, when then they would have implemented that debt to your payout from the pension fund, which meant that if you had a debt owing, first, they would deduct that from the lump sum you would have received. And if there wasn't enough in the lump sum, they would have then deducted it from the annuity that you would have received. Now, if you think about that logically, you would have then be left in a horrible position of getting a very little payout on your retirement. That then, a lot of noise was heard about it and the unfair position of it. That resulted in the Government Employee Pension Fund then amending their rules and changing the legislation that then governed the Government Employee Pension Fund. And then in 2019, there was a new position, which then provided for the reduction of pensionable service, of the years of pensionable service to GEPF members, taking into account that an amount that was paid to the former spouse in terms of the divorce order. Now that spoke directly to what was happening in the private sector. So what they did was that they adopted a clean break service adjustment approach. So the concept of the clean break came directly from the private sector. They tweaked it so that they now had a clean break service adjustment approach. This was then effective 1 August 2019 and applied to all divorces and divorce orders that were received by the Government Employee Pension Fund after this date. So what then is a clean break service adjustment approach? The new amendment now ensures that rather than creating a debt, there will be an adjustment to the members' pensionable service years, allowing for the payment of the divorce settlement by the GEPF. This then meant that the benefit that will be paid to the member when he exits the GEPF will now be decreased by reducing the number of members' years of pensionable service and taking into account that the pension amount that was paid to the spouse in divorce. This was seen to be the better approach in the sense that it left the member of the GEPF in a better space financially. So how exactly did that work? So on receipt of the divorce order, the Government Employee Pension Fund would work out what was the pension interest as a date of divorce. Thereafter, they would pay out the ex-spouse. Thereafter, they would then reduce by actuarial formula the amount that was paid out and equate that to a number of years. Your service adjustment was then done to ensure that when you then retire, you would have a lesser amount of service. However, the logical question that came from that was, what if after I paid out my divorce order, I would be left with less than 10 years worth of service? Would I then be compromised, or would I then be prejudiced in order to receive my normal benefits? So what would happen is, in order to determine your benefit, they would use the reduced number of years. However, in calculating your benefit, so to determine whether you were indeed entitled to a lump sum, plus you would be entitled to an annuity, they would use your full years of service. So your entire service period is used to determine whether you're getting a lump sum and a annuity. But when they had to determine how much that was, then they would determine that by using the reduced amount of service. So let's use that in a very simple practical example. I have 15 years worth of service. I then get divorced. My divorce order takes away half my pensionable interest. I then get reduced to 7 years worth of service. I'm due to retire in 2 years' time, which then takes me up to 9 years worth of service. In calculating how much money I'm entitled to, they would use 9 years worth of service. However, to determine whether I'm getting a lump sum and I am getting an annuity, they will take my full years of service, which was 15 years at date of divorce, add to that another 2 years for my retirement. I would then have 17 years worth of service, and I would be entitled to a lump sum as well as an annuity. And if I should have minor children, they would still be that should I pass away. So all that taken into account, it seems as though that the post-2019 position seems to be a more equitable position. Instead of creating a debt that would have been amounting to there being a large deduction at retirement, they reduce the years of pensionable service, thereafter coming to a more equitable solution at retirement age. So that is how the current status quo when it comes to divorce matters are dealt with by the GEPF.
Good morning. My name is Emlyn Steyn. I'm a PF advisor based out in the West Rand. Thanks for the opportunity for allowing me to share the GEPF pension fund capture screen. I'll start in the process to say that you have to go into product solutions, right? And then quite a number of selections will come up. One of them will be GEPF pension fund. You can click on that arrow and it will take you to the next screen. Right, it will say government employee pension fund, GEPF calculator. And at the bottom, you can click here. Right, now we start with the calculator. Very, very important tool to use if you are working with government employees. Doesn't matter which sector, whether it be health, education, defense, military, whatever you want to do, it is available for advice and just to actually show the people why it is important. What we will do here today is, it's now in the GEPF calculator screen, and the details are very, very simple. It also gives you an opportunity to find out what they're asking with the exclamation marks next to certain options there. So what we will start is, it says client details. So what we will do is, we'll use Mr. Joe Soap in this instance here. And his surname is Soap. It asks you for a date of birth, and it will give you the option of how to put the date of birth in. And for argument's sake, I'll use a date of birth that goes with a number of years of service in government, and that will be 1963/02/08. Then it also asks you for date of contribution started. So in this instance, you can click on the exclamation mark and see exactly what it requires of you. And when you click on the exclamation mark, it says date contribution started, the date on which a member began his or her contributions to GEPF. There is a difference in some of the employees, such as health. because they're in training for 4 years. So their services starts from the day they start training and from the day they start contributing to the pension fund. Also keep in mind that this pension fund is a defined benefit fund. So at the end of the day, the client, they'll use the last 2 annual salaries, and that will determine the benefit to the client. So for calculation purposes, we'll say that Mr. Soap started in 1985, 0101. Very important to have your backslashes in, or else it won't recognize it. The date of termination, they automatically calculate the date as his retirement date. So you can either put that date in, or you can put the date if he's going to terminate his services. So for calculation purposes, we leave the screen as it is. And if you go to your right-hand side, which is right there, it tells you exactly the years of service, how many years, which is 38, and how many months, right? If the client has purchased additional years of service, now every government employee is allowed to purchase additional years of service. How does it work? Most people start working at the age of 18. So if you get into the government employees or into the public sector in when you are 21, you can buy back 3 years. Now, it doesn't matter, even if you're in your latter years, you can still buy back provided you can afford. So if the person has purchased years back, they can enter the number of years there. Another opportunity for uniformed service people, those are secret service agents in our government, defense force, police services. They get special benefits. So you have the option of putting in yes or no there, right? Furthermore, if we go down to tax disallowed contribution, so let's get a description of what that entails. This is the contribution made by a member to a pension fund and or provident fund that did not qualify as a deduction for purposes of tax prior to joining the scheme. You can add that value in there. Another very important part is that you can calculate the 2-year service. And how do you do that? It gives you the opportunity to put it in and calculate. So the first one, we will take 2021's income, which would have been 450,000 Rand. And the number of days in that year was 365, right? Furthermore, you can put in the second, sorry, it's not allowing me because I've made a mistake there. Yeah, it's supposed to, oh yeah, there we are. So the second year, which is 2022, the client earned 485,000 Rand, and the number of days in this year is going to be 365. Then you can do the calculation, and then you will get the average final salary of the client. It will now compute it, and there you are. The next step here is that you can now proceed further and then generate a report. And that report will be divided into 3 areas. It will be the risk benefits that will show you if the client dies in service. Secondly, if the client becomes disabled in service. And thirdly, if the client is discharged in service due to incompetence or having done something wrong in the service, and that is what will happen there. So the next screen here is to do the calculation. All right, once you've done the final calculations, the final salary, and you've put in all the necessary information needed, you can then press next. And that will now take you to the GEPF calculation that will give you all the details that is required to confirm what you've put in, when the client started working and how many years service he has, when is his normal retirement age, date, and then also the number of years of service that he'll have. The beauty about the screen, it also gives the client the option of going on early retirement, and it then takes off 5 years. If you look to your right-hand side, it will show you that it's 33 years and 1 month compared to 38 years and 1 month. It also shows you the death benefit, as I've spoken, and it also says resignation. So the client has options: medical reasons, forced discharge, and a severance package. The severance package has now lately come back again, where they want to make place for the younger people to come into service. So they're allowing the older people that wants to take the early package, provided that they're not a key person in the structure. Once you've seen all this information here, you can now do the calculation. Before we go next, there are 3 options. You can ask for help and it will tell you exactly, and you can pose a question there and it will actually answer the question. Or you can go back to the previous screen and it will allow you to actually go and capture the information if you made a mistake. You can also start all over again if you need to, or if that is the case, you can now go ahead and say calculate. It's calculating right now. So this is the screen that you will get. Starting on the top, it says GPF calculation, calculator, the years purchased, which is 0 because you didn't buy any years. The normal retirement will tell you now exactly the year you're going to retire, what your 1/3 or your gratuity will be, which will be 1197 and 079, and what your monthly pension or income will be for the rest of your life will be 27,020, and you will then qualify for an increase on a yearly basis based on what the employees, on active employees in government gets, minus 1%. If you decide to go on early retirement, once again, it gives you the date, which we've gone past here in this case because of your age, what your lump sum would have been, and what your monthly income will be or is. When you die in service, there's a monthly income of 13,510. The question is, who gets that money? If you are married or if you have a partner and you can prove as far as partnership is concerned, that is the income the partner would receive for the rest of his or her life. And prior to these days, the partner was not allowed to remarry. That has changed. You are allowed to do so now. Payouts on normal death benefit after retirement. Now, there is a myth that people, and that's why people are concerned about the GEPF, to say that their money will be kept with government. That is not true. No pension fund will keep any people's money. They will find the beneficiaries. Now, what happens if you die today? In this case, Mr. Soap, if he dies today, his partner or his beneficiaries or nominees will receive 1,619,425 rand. If he dies a year after his retirement, the benefit reduces because they paid out all those 23,000 rands that he received on the top, which is 27,020 times 12, taken from 1,619,425. His family will then receive 1,295. And so the rest will apply up to the 5 years. So if he dies the second year, all payments made to himself will be taken off, and that's the lump sum to the beneficiaries. Third year, fourth year, up to the 5th year. If we go one step further, in early retirement, exactly the same process will follow, and the benefits will be paid out accordingly. The monthly income to the spouse, the immediate payment to the spouse and nominees after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. If Mr. Soap's death is before retirement, the lump sum, so if he dies in service, that's what before retirement means. Mr. Soap has 2 more years left to retire, but he dies this week. So the lump sum, that will be paid to the nominees, and the monthly income of 13,531 to the wife. If Mr. Soap decides that he's had enough of government and he's received an opportunity overseas and he resigns, there are three options that you can do here. And the one is that you can take the cash benefit and be liable for taxes. You can transfer to an approved fund, which is a preservation fund, and you can preserve it until retirement age. And the rules of the fund says that he is allowed, if he wants to make a withdrawal, only 1/3 of the capital transferred, subject to tax. When he reaches retirement, the 2/3 will not be paid out as a lump sum, but only as a monthly income or annuity. Medical restructuring. That means if you are boarded, so many government employees have become ill over the COVID period and prior to that, due to accidents or whatever, the lump sum here in his case will be 1,185,373, and his monthly income for life, 26,756. If he became naughty and he did the wrong things at work, there is a discharge. He can take his money and he can run, and he can also to keep it with government and get a monthly income if he wants to. And the income, once again, is 26,756. The lump sum, 1,185,000. The severance package is that people can exit when they reach 55 or before retirement age, and they will receive all benefits that they would have received as if they were to retire. And the monthly income would remain as 26,545. After you've gone through that process with the client, and the client is curious and wants to talk to his wife or his or her husband, you can then generate the report. And all you do is click generate. And you can then save the report, or you can first actually peruse the report and see if it has come out to what you wanted it to be, if it is correct, before submitting it to the client. And it gives you detailed descriptions of all the items I have just discussed with you. You can then check if his date of birth was correct, his termination service, his commencement when he started working for government, additional years if he had purchased any, total number of years of service, and the final average salary over the last 2 years. The second page is the summary of the benefits, which now includes your risk cover, what you are covered for as a GEPF member before you retire, death after you retire, and death early retirement. And here it gives you the opportunity to open up the doors, or even if you're trying to get into government employees, this is a tool that you can use to open up doors, because they're all curious about their money. And this can explain and give you the opportunity to use our products accordingly, such as you can see the funeral cover. Joseph, who is married, will get 15,000, which many members are not aware of. The spouse is covered, or the partner is covered for 15,000, and the kids up to the age of 22 are covered for 6,000. No family members are covered here. So here's an opportunity, firstly, to try and increase or offer them OM Protect funeral cover. And you can also then add the extended family in there if you need to. It also shows you what the disability benefit is compared to what they are currently earning. Another opportunity for you to actually offer disability insurance. The most important benefit that you can offer, which government does not offer, is severe illness. So here's another opportunity for you to go in and offer severe illness cover. The monthly benefits, as earlier mentioned, is the spouse's pension, the children's pension, which is a new benefit that came in a couple of years ago. Prior to that, the money used to be paid into the Guardians Fund, and they only receive it at a later stage. Now a monthly income is paid up to the age of 22, whether they're studying or not. And as I mentioned, your full discharge, your disability charge. Death after retirement, as mentioned in the first screen before we did the calculation, it gives you the details. Another opportunity here is cover for the spouse and for himself if he needed to upgrade on what he needs. the savings, which is a very important part and a very important tool for us to actually offer more retirement savings, because a lot of people think that the money that they're going to get from government is going to be sufficient. But we all live different lives and we all have different expenses. So the question is, will we have sufficient capital to maintain our lifestyle or to improve it? And here's an opportunity to offer a retirement annuity, not just for savings purposes, but also for tax advantage, because the contributions of this pension fund is 7.5% by Mr. Soap and approximately 12.5% by the government. So it gives 20%, and we are allowed to deduct 27.5% of our taxable income. So the opportunity is another 7.5%, which not many people take up, but it is an option for them to work towards. So these are all the different annuity calculations, and it details everything for you, what your lump sums are, what your monthly incomes are. A very, very important tool if it's early and if it's normal. So you can then show the client, if he wants to go early, you've got to bump up what you're going to lose. Now, this is a very, very important screen, because a lot of young people are leaving the services and they don't know much because they're not consulting, and they actually take all their money and then pay a massive amount of tax, use whatever they need to use, and then invest the difference. The correct way is to advise them by saying that you have X amount of money. What is your current need financially? Because most people are resigning for financial reasons. And at the end of the day, they are taking all their money, spending it on worthless things. So the opportunity here is to ask them to preserve into our wealth preservation fund, and they are then allowed to withdraw 1/3 minus any taxes applicable, if that's going to satisfy their current cash need. But in this example of Mr. Soap, is that because of the years of service, his pension seems high, which is 5 million rand. He is allowed to transfer 5 million rand into Old Mutual if he needs to, or to any other company that he prefers. Because Mr. Soap started before 98. So this is the rule of the GEPF pension fund, that any person having started prior to 98 will receive the benefit of a tax-free portion on his lump sum. As you can see there, the tax-free portion pre-98 works out to 1.7 million rand. The tax-free portion will go into his bank account. So if his 1/3 is approximately 1.7, or it's less, I think it is 1.6 here, 1.650, he will get the full 1.650 into his bank account because of his cash-free tax-free portion being 1,764,000. So it's a very, very important tool, and also it saves you on paying taxes. If Mr. Soap has done all the right things in his life and he doesn't need to take any cash, he can preserve this money until the actual retirement date. And then he will still be allowed to take his 1/3 as a gratuity from Old Mutual and a monthly income from Old Mutual. That's how this will work. Very, very important, and it's important that people understand this before making the decisions, and this is how the GEPF tool works. I would like to say thank you for giving me the opportunity. There are a lot of opportunities available. It is for us now to take this opportunity and make good use of it. Thank you.